Hi, everybody. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple lesser known serial killers, international serial killers, mainly because I've mainly been talking about a lot of American killers and criminals. I want to start branching out into more international. So these are two killers that I couldn't find a ton of information about. Um, and this was researching court cases, newspaper articles, just about everything I could find. There's very limited information about these two. One of them I have a little more information, um, but again, they're lesser known, they're international, and not all countries have the same access to information that we do in the US. So a lot of that information is not necessarily going to be public access. Court cases are not necessarily public access in other countries. And they're, in some countries, they're not nearly as publicized. So sometimes it's limiting, there's very limited information for some of these cases, even though they sound like really cool cases, you can only find so much. So the two that I'm going to talk about are Javed Iqbal, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's a serial killer from Pakistan, and I'm going to attempt this. I am probably going to butcher it, so anybody that can pronounce it better, I'm sorry. Kampatimer Shankariya. That is my best attempt at it. He is an Indian serial killer. Now, he's the one, Kampatimer is the one where I really couldn't find a ton of information on him, but I at least wanted to mention him because I had never heard of him. So, Javed, or Javed, I'm not 100% sure. I'm gonna call him Javed because that's the pronunciation I can do. So, I'm sorry if it's wrong. And feel free to tell me that I pronounced it wrong in the comments. I am totally okay with people calling me out on accidentally mispronouncing something. So he was born in 1956, and like I said, he's a Pakistani serial killer and a pederast, which is an adult male who has sexual relations with a prepubescent or pubescent male. So he had sex with young boys and teenage boys. And he ultimately confessed to having these sexual encounters and murdering 100 boys between the ages of 6 and 16. And the way that he did it was after he got these boys to a certain location or abducted them. It didn't really say how he got his victims, but he would have the sexual encounter. So whether that be he had sex with them, he raped them, oral sex, anything like that, that would have been the sexual encounter with that child. And then he would strangle them, dismember them, so cut them into smaller pieces, some would say more manageable pieces, so that he could dispose of the body. And then he would dissolve the corpse in acid, most likely hydrochloric acid. That's a very strong acid. It's what a lot of killers and a lot of criminals use if they're going to be trying to dissolve stuff in acid. And so the little bit that I could find about his past and his childhood and his upbringing was he was the sixth of 8 children to a businessman father, and he attended the government Islamia College. And then in 1978, while he was still a student, he started a steel recasting business. And then in 1999, so he would have been about 43 at the time, right around that age. He sent a letter to police, and a Lahore newspaper chief editor, whose name was Kawar Naeem, I think, Naeem Hashmi, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I don't speak Pakistani, so I'm attempting these names as best as I can. In the letter, he confessed to the rape and murder of 100 runaway boys between the ages of 6 and 16, like I had said before. And in the letter, he actually explained how he did it and how he disposed of the bodies. So the letter was signed, so it's him confessing to everything, not being kind of like the BTK, where BTK did it, where he would write letters to like the police and to newspapers and media, and he would not sign it. There was no way to trace it back. Whereas Javed signed it. There was some way to trace it back to him. And so police went to his house, they raided his house, and inside they found bloodstains, walls, floor, bunch of chains around where he would keep the children, and a bunch of pictures of his victims, and essentially him kind of documenting the process of the sexual assaults and the violence and disposing of the bodies. Think similar to Jeffrey Dahmer, how they found a bunch of Polaroid pictures in his house, in his dresser. Same sort of idea. Police found a bunch of pictures. And they also found the acid that Javed was disposing the bodies in. And when they opened up the vats of acid, they actually found a partially dissolved body. They didn't have to open it, my bad. They actually, it was left open for police to find, with a note actually nearby saying, oh yeah, I left this for you so that you guys would find it and find evidence of, the crap that I did. Which is amazing. I don't know why somebody would do that, but then not be, because he was not actually at his home. From what I could find, they had to go find him at a different location. It didn't say where, but he was not in the home at the time. So then, once they had him in custody, he confessed that he had been planning on drowning himself in the Ravi River. I have a cat right by me, so my camera's gonna go a little out of focus. After his crimes, but so he had planned to drown himself in the Ravi River, but the police actually went and dragged the river with nets, but never found a body. So then the police launched a manhunt, the largest manhunt in Pakistani history, in search of him, in search of Javed. So then 4 accomplices who were teenage boys that shared Javed's flat, his apartment, were arrested in Sohawa, and there's a little bit of conflicting information on this next little bit, but within a few days, one of the 4 boys was dead in police custody. They don't know if he committed suicide. There's more evidence showing that it was possibly caused by police, from like police brutality and force being used against him. But like I said, there's no real evidence of if it was one or the other. But one of them at that point was dead. So then Javed's motives for committing the murder was his infuriation, his just madness of his perceived injustice from the Lahore police. It didn't really explain exactly what had happened, like what caused it, but there was some hinting at the fact that it took them this long to really, outside of his admission of guilt, it took them this long to start really investigating these runaway children cases. They were disappearing in large numbers over many years, but nobody ever tied it together. And so there was some hints that that's kind of what caused it. He wanted to get caught, and that's kind of ultimately what led him to admitting what he did. But that was never 100% proven. So then later, before his trial, even though he had admitted, like, this is all the stuff that I did, he then decided to be like, oh no, I didn't do any of that. Decided that he was not guilty. And that was the plea that he was going to put in. But there was enough evidence against him that the judge and the people overseeing the court case were like, you're guilty, So they sentenced him to death. And actually, they sentenced him, the way that he was going to die was the same way that he killed his victims. So strangled, cut into 100 pieces, one piece for each child that he murdered. And all this was going to take place in front of the families of the children that he killed. And then he was going to be dissolved in acid. So that was the intended way that he was going to die, which is very interesting. I've never heard of that sort of thing ever kind of being allowed. And of course, the Interior Minister, again, I'm probably going to butcher this name, Moinuddin Haidar, stated the punishment was not allowed. It was too extreme of a punishment. But before any other punishment could be determined and laid out, Javed actually killed himself in jail before his sentence could be carried out, before any sentence could be carried out, which personally I think is the cheap way to go. With the kind of thinking of, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. That's always been kind of my mentality, but, not everybody's way of thinking. So the other guy that I wanted to talk about, Kampatimer Shankariya. Now, mind you, like I said, there's only a little bit of information that I was able to find about him. And if you see any hair flying around, that is all because of my cat. My cat is shedding at the moment. So he is an Indian serial killer born in 1958. He was arrested at age 26 after having killed about 70 people between 1977 and 1978. So 70 was the number that was confirmed, although he was suspected to have killed between 90 and 100 people. And he killed his victims by hitting them in the hammer on the neck below the ear. So it would have been like right around this area. So, and that gained him the nickname, I'm not even going to attempt that because I know that I'm going to butcher it, but essentially it means one who hits under the ear. And he was convicted of his crimes in early 1979, and he was hanged in Janpur on May 16th, 1979. His last words were, because most places offer time for last words, His were, I have murdered in vain. Nobody should become like me. That is literally all the information that I could find about him for like published articles and stuff that I would say is relatively accurate. Which, like I said, some countries, they don't have the same news access and information access on court cases that we do in the US. A lot of the information about him is just stuff that's public knowledge, stuff that you'd be able to get word of mouth very easily or in newspapers. But more specifics is not really available for everybody, which kind of sucks because I'd love to be able to do more international cases, and I plan to do more. Just sometimes they're going to be short, so I might mush them together kind of like I did this one, where I might do a couple smaller cases to kind of present like, hey, this is what I was able to find. If anybody has any questions or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to leave it down in the comments. I'm always interested to learn more about other people, other crimes, all that sort of stuff. Have a great day, everybody.